Fortnightly podcast where we discuss all things game audio, from creative ideas to the latest techniques, project experiences to audio secrets. Here is where you'll find in-depth coverage and opinions related to game audio. And hello, everyone. And I just want to say especially hello to Chase because, hey,
Hello.
you shipped. You shipped.
Yes, I did. Thank you. I've been scoring the game for about 2.5 years. Most people know. I've been promoting it like crazy. It's called Aground. It's mostly a progression game where you take 2 different science paths, magic or science, and 2 different paths of magic or science, and you build your way up into hopefully leaving the planet and discovering why you even got there. So I was a composer, sound designer, and technical sound designer on the project for quite some time. And yeah, we shipped on Friday and it was good. It was fun. I popped champagne and that was that.
Nice. Oh man. How's it feel like celebrating in this, well, were you able to celebrate with anyone in person? Like, did you have did you have like a virtual launch party for the game?
Yeah, we all entire dev team got on Discord, and a little before we all pressed the launch button together on Steam and on PC. We asked the community to ask us questions about like anything of the development, how we met, and things like that. And then we all played multiplayer together for the first time, together live, and just had our own little like group setting for that for about some time. So it was about a 5-hour virtual party. It's pretty fun.
Wow. That's really cool.
And then my girlfriend surprised me with Wood Ranch for lunch, so it felt like a little company party. Some barbecue.
Oh, nice. All right, barbecue, Wood Ranch. Nice little California, little SoCal barbecue institution over here. Speaking of California institutions, Mike, how are you doing?
I am doing, thank you, that was an excellent segue. Very flattering, too. I'm doing great, thanks. Always great to be back on our fortnightly basis.
Ooh, excellent. Always glad to have you here. And speaking of not California institutions, we need to get you here, Alex. Come on, you should join us over here. We could have all sorts of fun stuff. How are you doing, Alex?
I'm fine. Yeah, actually, as soon as the planes are switched on again and then the world turns on again, I'm there. I can't wait. Actually, seriously though, the Los Angeles is for a long time. It's been top of my list of places that I want to visit. I've never actually been to LA before, and I think I've been to quite a lot of other places in the United States, but not LA. And most other people from around the United States say don't even bother going to LA because it's horrible. So I really want to go and find out for myself, because I know a lot of fantastic people in LA, such as you fine gentlemen. So can't wait.
Well, LA means a lot of things, you know. If anyone wants to say that LA is just this X, Y, Z, you know, they're very likely wrong, because there's so much to do in LA, and LA means so many different things to so many different people. When you come here, we're going to have a grand time. But until then, we're going to keep on hanging out online. And this is a pretty cool venue for this sort of discussion. So how about we get right into it, shall we? Ooh.
Let's do it.
So, Chase, you just finished with a project, which actually got me thinking about what to do at the end of a project. I've been having to deal with this a little bit as well, just because of developers that have asked me to go back into things that were done 2-3 years ago and see if I could actually give something to them. And I realized that, all right, this person asked me for this thing. What am I going to do? I'm going to break out my 3-year-old computer that has this project sitting on it that I haven't touched. Or maybe there should be a better way of going about it. And I was hoping maybe all of you could shed some light on this. What do you do when you're at the end of a project and it's time to file it away and not have it take up valuable hard drive space on your working machine?
It's fantastic. Go ahead, Mike. You go first.
Sure. Well, I was going to say there's a real distinction between best practices and how to preserve data and functionality in an ever-changing technological environment and what I actually do. Best practices, I think, we'd probably agree that for any track, that is the side effect of MIDI or audio data being processed by various plugins and editorial changes and maybe comping if your DAW has a comping system. The best thing to do is to render into static form every track of every cue, so that 5 years from now, if they want to release the Aground Deluxe Super Nostalgia Edition, Chase can just load up all the cues, and since half the manufacturers of plugins will have gone out of business, he'll have at least the pre-rendered tracks and can just reconstitute every cue as needed. So that's the smart thing to do. But I never actually do that. I let my Logic sessions sit mostly unchanged, and then sure enough, every now and then I go back to unearth an old cue, and Logic says, "Whoa, this is from 4 versions ago. You're lucky I can even read this." And then half the plugins are like, "The person who made this plugin died. What are you trying to do?" And everything's broken, and I have to substitute plugins. So I'm aware of best practices, but I never seem to do them. And I hope the rest of you have better traditions than I do.
Ugh, man, honestly, from your description, it sounds like you're doing about where I am, actually. I've definitely been dealing with things like, oh, where did that plugin go? How do I redo this delay? It could be something really simple, like, oh, here's an EQ. Here's a delay effect that I use on a track. And I don't have that anymore. It's not installed. It no longer works on this iteration of Windows or something like that. And then I have to figure out how to deal with that before I can try rendering out something new 3 years since the game came out. What about Chase, Alex? Do you think you're doing it a little better than us?
No. No, I think what Mike said, like the best practices, obviously the best practices to take, we're talking music here. So sound effects production is a bit easier because you have a final output, which will be your, 2448 WAV of the single sound effect asset in mono or stereo or whatever. That's the actual output of what you're doing. And so having like this whole bank of individual assets like that is arguably enough for sound effects production. You don't need to go through and, if you have a composite sound effect that's made up of 8 tracks of different sounds, I think it might be slight overkill to go and take, 600 assets and then render stems of every composite track out of every sound effect from every project of every sound of the game. It's probably a bit overkill. But as for music, I agree with Mike that the best practices are obviously to go and render stems from every track of every cue for the game, which will kind of, to a certain degree, future-proof yourself, at least as much as we're able, hoping that in the future the WAV format will actually still be around, and that, audio hardware is not going to, at the moment, if we're running 24-bit and 48 kilohertz, that it's not going to be like, oh my God, you still using 48 kilohertz 24-bit? That's like so 2020.
Oh, man.
Let's hope we don't get to that time. But no, the reality is that no, I don't either. I think I usually will take the. I consider myself fairly sort of obsessive about making sure that I can go back to edit things afterwards if I have to. So I try to work in as sort of non-destructive ways as possible, and when completing projects, try to be fairly rigorous in how I back up the data. But I think choice of plugin company, so a company that you can sort of see has a good history up to this point and seems like they're likely to be in business for a lot longer. And then also rendering to stems, at least rendering to audio if you've got MIDI parts. I guess that's where I'm a little bit different because I work in Tracker. So everything already is audio in the way that I work. So it's all basically samples. Then, of course, you just need to rely on the DAW actually still being around in order to read that, which is another topic of discussion. But the answer is stems. Let's be better about that.
Yeah, I actually have something I want to say about it, especially since you mentioned that divide between music and sound effects. But before I comment on that, Chase, you actually just finished a ground. Do you have any ideas or plans for how you're going to treat all the assets that you've made for it? Because you know you're not just a music composer; you're also a sound designer, technical sound designer. What are your plans?
Yeah, so typically I'm in the process. Unfortunately, the it's come from two different things. One being new and one being unfortunate. I got hit with ransomware about a year ago, 5 times in less than a year. Even when I was like moved over and things like that, 5 times. And so finally, I did a lot of research, locked that down. And what that's taught me to do is definitely do the stem output as I should have been doing, because some of those plugins weren't really working and they was crashing, and it was a hot mess. And so the second part of that was I was getting requested for remixes by the Aground community, people we have like an audio channel in the Discord, and they were picking apart the tracks because they were so complex, and they were like, what is this? What is that? And they were doing, I was like, well, I can, we'll make a contest out of it, and you can have the stems remix if you guess what I put in the music. And so through those two circumstances has caused me to do the stemming early. And so therefore, and I was doing it years ago, but there's just depends on the project that you own or you don't own. It just doesn't seem to make sense for. And then systematically throughout the time, I would just back up the project every month. So I have an external hard drive, has all my projects on there, going through certain things. And if I'm doing sound design, there's revisions that we have. So if there's the final revision they like, I move to a finals folder. And then the other one I keep as mixed renders, and the mixed renders goes into the dump. Now, if they don't own the sound effects, there's only a license as such, they're mine. So now I have an opportunity to do whatever I want to do with them, and they go into a different folder, which is my collection of sounds that I've made, so I don't have to redo them over time. And then I have like a presets thing for a synthesizer for anything of patches of things of that nature. And Cubase has like a little notepad, so I write the actual patch out number, name, and everything in it. So like there's backup of backups of backups in my mind of some future-proof thing, because I've dealt with this for so long. And I just always seem to run into some kind of wall where I'm like, dang, I didn't prepare. So I want to be more prepared for the future. So yeah, recap, stemming, backup on hard drive, folders, moving it out as you do them. Taking care of it while you do it in the same day and the same time has helped me than trying to wait to the end of the project, because it becomes overwhelming.
Chase, what is you said ransomware? Just could you clarify? I don't. It seems like I understand that, but I don't.
Yeah, so there used to be like viruses and Trojan horse type of things that would take over your malicious malware or anything that would take over your computer. And it's kind of like that, but it's ramped up. It's like the virus we're dealing right now, or just inside your computer. So the people, since blockchain and cryptocurrency has been discovered, people can take over your computer and lock it down for certain programs to not work. For example, mine was SoundForge, and they'll glitch it, and then they'll hold it as captives. Like, hey, if you pay me this money, we'll unlock your computer, or they'll use your computer for mining cryptocurrency, and you won't know. So anytime you're idle and you have a browser open or it's not secure, things of that nature, like you can get hit if you don't have the proper software to protect you. Which in this case is a quick plug to Acronis for thank you for saving my bacon.
I see. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
This topic ties into a more general issue of good habits for any creative people, which is backup policy. And as bad as I am with rendering stems, I am good with backups. And I've got like a local hard drive that does nightlies. I've got offsite backup with Backblaze. So if the big one hits Los Angeles and we all disappear into a crater, subsequent generations can go and access my Backblaze account and restore all my works in process, and hopefully continue the legacy. What I'm doing is just standard good idea, good practice. You've got your convenient local hard drive, and you just copy to that all the time, so that if you accidentally delete something, you can just grab that. And then for more long-term purposes, more security against theft or fire or disaster, you have your backup in a remote location. If you can't afford Backblaze, you could just buy a cheap hard drive every 6 months and mail it to a relative and just say, store this in your closet and forget about it unless I call you. But if you've got those two things, and of course your original data, then you're fulfilling the ethic of backups, which is all data should exist in three places. So that is something that everyone should do in all creative fields, but is worth thinking about in terms of project archiving.
Yeah, it's actually our projects we all put through some form of version control. Usually it's Git, using Git LFS for storing large files, and that also gives you a fair degree of redundancy, it being that your colleagues will have your data on their machines too.
There's an interesting distinction. Oh, please go ahead.
Since you mentioned Git, I just wanted to say, have any of you considered using some of these version control software that's very commonly used throughout video game production, just for your own internal sound and music production?
Yes, I do. Yeah, so we have through the company stuff we use GitLab, but for my own personal stuff I use GitHub. Just for only the reason of a convenient way to keep them separate. But there's a rare situation when you may be able to benefit from the other kinds of features that version control gives you, like branching and stuff like that, on your own personal project. Not very often, really, but it's just another backup, really, is the way I like to think of it.
Okay, I haven't done it myself, but I always thought about it, especially since even for like the really big professional tools, so things like Perforce, for example, is really quite an expensive proposition for anyone except very large teams, but they do offer it for free for individuals. And so I'm very used to Perforce. I thought, man, maybe I should just install Perforce here on my home server and use that on my make a repository of my whole music project folder.
Yeah, I should clarify that I'm using the GitLab and GitHub's cloud services, which is obviously, if it's entirely local and you're just doing local version control, that has limited usefulness, really.
Right.
I mean, it's just really a way to have a copy of your stuff somewhere else, another way, alongside Backblaze and other kinds of, especially if you're on a Mac, Time Machine is really good. Mm-hmm. So my Mac stuff, I have Time Machine as well as Backblaze, as well as version control. So hopefully when the big one hits, as Mike put it, I should be okay.
Right. Oh yeah, sound effects. You mentioned sound effects, and I feel like I'm in the same boat as you, as you lot when it comes to music and our sort of questionable practices in some cases. But I think I found that I'm actually pretty good on the sound effects thing. Mostly because I do tend to keep some pretty good notes about how I actually make things and try to sort of save processes as their own files alongside the actual sound assets that are being made. So that means, batch job files from SoundForge, project files from GameSynth that I use for a lot of processing. And so if I need to figure out how I did a particular type of sound effect, I could actually look at those and see what I did. And it was actually a couple of things rather early on in my career that really pushed me to do that. When I was working on Skullgirls, which was about a decade ago now, which is really crazy to think about, the Japanese voice actors, there was a whole different Japanese dev team that was going to be recording all of the Japanese voice actors and also dealing with sound effects, because all that stuff was going to be implemented on their side for the Japanese arcade game, which would be in Japan. We're not going to touch it. But they wanted to know, how did I do some of the specific things? Like, how did you do this weird processing on this particular character? Because we want to make sure that it's aligned with how you did it on the English version. And thankfully, I actually saved those all into the SoundForge batch job process files with good descriptions. And so, this is basically this series of comb filtering happening here, and then this pitch shift, et cetera, et cetera. So even if they didn't necessarily have all of the right software to do exactly what I did, they could replicate it. And then ever since that point, I decided, okay, these are actually pretty simple to save. I'm going to keep these alongside. And so I saved those project files in my directory of assets that are also going to be saved alongside. So it's kind of funny. I think I'm actually better when it comes to being able to look back at not just the assets that I've made, but also the how I made of sound effects versus music.
It's kind of an argument. This is bleeding into the next topic that we were going to talk about, but it's kind of an argument for not going too crazy with third-party plugins, isn't it? Because you can kind of be more confident that if you're only using native plugins from your DAW, that in the future, provided that DAW still exists, which I will talk about in a moment because I have opinions, or I should say I have experience. But provided the DAW still exists, you can be a bit more confident that, everything will work just fine because you're only using native plugins instead of third-party plugins from potentially very small developers that may not be around and may not be able to maintain compatibility.
Yeah, that's definitely something. I know for that Skullgirls stuff, I was using a particular plugin a lot. It was this program called SFX Machine Pro. And that company was around for quite a long time, ever since the early 2000s, and I've just continued using them for a lot of stuff. You can do all sorts of cool, fun processing, cool filtering and phasing, and this whole sort of topology of being able to route and modulate different sources. It was really cool. And then the company actually went under about 4 or 5 years ago, which isn't so great. And actually, it wasn't really the most popular company to begin with. So I know how to do things with this particular tool. And it's hard to actually translate that or convey that to other people who don't understand this tool or have never even seen this tool before. And now, I don't use the tool anymore because the company has been dead for years. But I do miss that. I do miss that program.
Do you guys feel when you're looking at plugins, like you I don't know where you get information about plugins like KVR or Gearsluts or somewhere like that, and you say, here's something new and interesting and cool and fun and amazing, and it's like by some plucky indie plugin developer, like single person shop, or like just a new developer on the scene who's doing some wild and crazy amazing creative things. Do you shy away from things like that because you may be concerned that, yes, it's an amazing product, but are they going to be around in a few years when I need them to be around and still updating their software? Or do you not care about that and just live in the moment, go for the sound right now, live dangerously?
I think there's a distinction to be drawn between soundware that's written for an existing platform like Contact, which itself will be maintained by a large established company, and then plugins, self-contained software elements that have to be entirely developed and maintained by the developers. And in the latter case, which is what I think you're talking about, I've been burned a few times where I've had a plugin through an indie developer who, if you read their website, they seem very passionate and had evergreen ambitions to be around and redefine the future of sound in some fashion. And then 3 years later, I loaded up a queue because I needed to make a quick remix for a demo or something else. And suddenly I got error messages because such and such plugin didn't work with Catalina or whatever else. So I've become increasingly gun shy of relying on plugins for small indie developers for exactly the reason that you said. I'm comfortable, of course, using the plugins that are native to Logic because those are as reliable as Logic is. And plugins by large established publishers like Plugin Alliance, I'm also pretty comfortable with. But when it comes to the young, scrappy, and hungry upstarts, I ask myself really hard questions about whether the functionality in this plugin exists elsewhere. And even if it's not as glamorous to use old reliable compressor number 3, maybe it's better for the longevity of the queue.
Yeah, how about you, Chase? Do you care about the sort of potential stability of a small plugin company business, or Is it about the moment, the sound right now?
It depends on how it's going to help me within a 6-month time frame. So if I'm on a certain project, and I mean, we get these emails all the time, right? This new thing is out now. Check this new synth out, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, does it sound familiar? Does it sound new? And does it give me the edge that I'm looking for? Or is it something to help me get to that sound that I've been trying to get to for a while? If it doesn't answer that question, I don't even bother. It doesn't matter if it's more reliable or less reliable, like bigger indie, smaller indie. It's just like, how does it suit me right now? And do I need it right now? Do I have the funds right now? Right? Like is it necessary? Because you want to support some of the indie developers too, to hopefully get up to that stage, whereas in they are around, right? And so some of those starting out have those nice donate buttons and chip ins, and you want to be sure that it kind of goes with it, in that time and how it relates to it. But for me, really, it's more of, is it accentuating anything that I'm already doing in the moment? And if not, then I'd have to move on.
I see. Yeah, this is a topic that's quite close to my heart because, as you guys know, my choice of DAW is extremely esoteric. So my DAW is Renoise, which is a tracker DAW, and it's kind of very esoteric. And the reality is that Renoise is developed by one person, and as the DAW, you rely on that program entirely. Like basically, all of the stuff that I do is in it, all the music stuff that I do, which means that in 5 years' time, if I can't load up those projects and I haven't gone ahead and made stems and all of that kind of stuff, then I'm in trouble. The thing with Renoise was that the developer said that releases for the DAW are going to be very, very slow because it's a mature platform, and adding more stuff to it when you don't need to add more stuff to it, when it just works fine as it is just going to create bloatware, and that's not really what this is about. He's always said that Renoise is a specific esoteric tool for people with specific tastes and workflow. It doesn't have to be all things to everybody. So if it works and it's stable, why should I update it? Like, what benefit does that give you if it's stable and it works and the functionality is there? So then that led a lot of people, there was like 3 years in between updates, and it led a lot of people to sort of say, oh, this is abandonware, and like, it's dead. Renoise is dead. The reality is the developer was actually right, because it is completely stable even 3 years later. It's crashed on me, like, I think twice in the past 12 years, I think, that I've been using it. And both times it's been because of third-party plugins. And so it is entirely stable. The functionality is incredible for what it is. So why should he have to make updates just to prove to people that it is alive and that it's an active project? But of course, the reality is that people pay money, and people expect that if I'm paying $50, which is how much it costs, if I'm paying $50 for this product, I want to know that it's going to be around in 5 years' time when I need it to be still stable and still functional. And it's always been a kind of a nagging thought. The happy end of that story, by the way, was that after 3 years, he did actually release an update to added all these amazing new features and like high DPI screen support and VST3 and all this kind of cool stuff. That's fantastic. Wow, it's alive, it's back. And now we know that there's another 5 years to go until the next update, but it works and it's totally stable. So it's a topic that's fairly close to my heart, just because I'm always worried when I'm using this software and doing more work in Renoise. I'm always thinking to myself, am I going to be able to still open these projects in the future? Is this still going to be around, this DAW that I use? So the answer is, sadly for me, that I don't really have much of a choice, because I find it very uncomfortable to use anything else. So I have to stick with it, which means I have to get a bit more rigorous with my post-project stemming, I guess, is the ultimate solution. But yeah, it's I guess, to answer my own question, I use the software from big or small developers right now because now is now, and worry about 5 years' time in 5 years' time. But it's a constant sort of point of anxiety.
Oh man,
To
go for it.
I was just going to say, to unify this concern with our immediately prior topic, you can use stem rendering as a way to insure yourself against this exact issue. Now with renoise, it's tricky because it's your whole DAW that you speculate Monday might not be available or might not be compatible. And I'm curious, in the case of the tracker world, which is both futuristic and primitive to me at the same time, is there the equivalent of a standard MIDI file? Is there some lingua franca that you can export to so that if renoise dies, there's some marginally similar product that could vacuum in your DAW files and recreate your cues?
Not if you're creating in renoise. If you're creating in other things, then things like some of those old classic formats like Impulse Tracker or Screen Tracker. But it's not really a universal interchange format. I think because renoise is such a different thing, it takes tracker stuff and modernizes it in ways that these legacy software can't really keep up with. There isn't really an equivalent to sort of a universal standard across all modern trackers, I think, because there's only really like 3 or 4 modern trackers anyway. So the answer is not really, no.
And actually just sort of piggybacking off that, with the trackers, it's typically it's been sort of traditionally difficult to apply a track paradigm on top of the channels that trackers provide. So what does that mean when it comes to rendering stems in something like renoise? Is that actually something where you have to think about that beforehand, and if you don't, then it's actually really difficult to render stems?
No, not really. I know what you mean. If you're dealing with sort of real demo scene hardcore tracker stuff, you have 4 channels, and you're going to be, just so people know, you've got these channels that go vertically like that, and basically the hardcore way to do it is that you have your bank of samples and you have 4 channels, and you'd be mixing samples across different channels basically where there is an opening. So because you can only play 4 sounds at once, you're going to want to be mixing them across different channels. And then in order to mix things, basically you are adjusting the volume of the sample as opposed to the volume of the instance of the sample, right? That's the hardcore way to do it from old school. These days, something like renoise does not really have a limitation on the amount of channels that you can have. So you just have like this channel, just arbitrarily, I'll just set this to all of my kick drums. And this is all of my snares. And this is all of my hi-hats. And then here's a group that mixes all that together. And it basically functions more or less like a regular horizontal DAW, in that you have one instrument on one channel. So that when you go to do stems, you can just basically, the same with renoise, you'll have send tracks, so you can send it out to an auxiliary bus to get effects on there. So to render stems is basically the same process as it is in a regular horizontal DAW. So I don't do, because you can have an unlimited amount of channels. I don't do much sort of, unless it's a specific reason for it, like if we want to have different effects applied to different channels and then basically just really rapidly move between them. Unless you're wanting to do that, there's not really a need in my case for mixing things across channels. So yeah, it's not a problem.
That makes sense.
Good question.
Sorry, I also interrupted you, Mike.
Well, that being a minute or 2 in the past is long past the threshold of my remembering what I was going to ask. So.
Oh man, let's see. There was a little comment in the chat here. Michael, not you, Mike, but Michael in the chat saying that he doesn't actually let the whole big companies versus small indies factor into his decision making. He's more concerned about things like eye lock when it comes to whether he'll invest in something or not. And I gotta admit, that's also been a factor for me. I have an iLock dongle, and that is stuck in my drawer ever since I had an iLock issue 3 years ago crop up. And now there's a couple of UVI software that I just don't use anymore. So that's something.
Yeah, PSP's gone full iLock as well.
Oh wow! Oh really? I didn't
Remember?
realize that. It's been a while since
Yeah.
I've used their stuff.
Yeah, good old PSP. Good old PSP. They switched to everything being based on iLok. So a lot of their older stuff still works as the old licensing system, but every new update that they've done now uses iLok, and basically the roadmap involves transitioning all of their product lineup to iLok.
I had a real problem with Dorico recently. And, after I upgraded to Catalina, I think, Dorico started going crazy, and it would forget which version of Dorico I had and whether or not it was licensed, and it would sometimes work and it sometimes wouldn't. Fortunately, Dorico has excellent support on the forums, but after a little bit of chat, I found out that the problem was I was using an older iLok dongle and had to buy one of the newer squatter ones in order to continue to use everything. And gosh, I wish I'd known of that incompatibility. I guess the functionality of the old ones was on a declining curve, and I had always been under the curve, and then the upgrade of the Mac OS operating system pushed me into the trouble zone. To the credit of the Dorico folks, and Daniel in particular, he issued me a temporary license for the software validation version of Dorico. You can do it two ways. I think you can use an iLok, or you can just have it, beam a validation message to their servers and basically validate your ownership that way. And he gave me a 90-day license, so that was like plenty of time to go out and buy the stubby iLok key. But I'm not a fan of dongles, even if they're invisible. They're there, and they're slowing something down, and they want to break, and they want to break at the worst possible time. I'm happier with the idea of having some kind of internet ping that has to be done every 15 days, because I think in practice it's faster and easier.
Yeah, I agree with that. I got a bit. I've got those squat dongles, and they really suck because I do manage a couple of different dongles that have things, since I sometimes run software on separate computers simultaneously. And those things do not want to fit in USB ports side by side. They're just slightly too squat, and it pisses me off.
Yeah, I think we've all got iLok horror stories, because I think iLok recently, they have this software license, right, where you don't need a dongle. You can actually, it works the same way, except it's done entirely in software. And that's what PSP and UVI, both of them say that, oh, you don't need a dongle. It's done through iLok's software authorization. Great, not great, because what happened to me was that the previous MacBook Pro, actually this MacBook Pro that I have, the logic board fried itself. So I had to take it to the Apple Store and have them replace it. And when you do that, because the iLok software thing is somehow tied to the actual motherboard, which amazes me, but that's how it works. It means that when you do that, basically, you now have an unlicensed machine. And, when you write to the iLok people, is there anything that can be done? Because they have like these, 12 plugins from different companies that were registered to the previous motherboard, and the only way to use them is to deauthorize on the previous motherboard, but you can't do that because it's fried. So all you can do is write to every one of these developers, and actually PSP was one of the companies that I had to write to say, sorry, can you reset my license count because my previous computer fried itself. And kind of time consuming. It's a good thing I had time for that. But gee, if I was in the middle of a project and we have a deadline coming up in a few days, and it's like, oh my god, it's not working now. Has that been your whole story, Chase?
Yep, ransomware. One of them out of the 5 times actually got to the iLok version of the software, and I had to figure that out just as you was explaining. And I was in the middle of the ground project, which with the deadline at that time for I think an update, and had to like refresh the entire computer, and then didn't realize that machine was like off of the old system. Like it was on the same machine, so I had to like write them, and it was just weird. It was a nightmare. But yeah, under deadline, Oh man, I have a journal somewhere about the project, which all that stuff lays out.
Man,
Keep a journal of every project, so yeah, it's in there.
this stuff.
Chase, how do you like not complain more if you've had experiences like that? Like, if I got ransomware, I would do the Liam Neeson Taken speech on this show, and the last thing you'd see of me is me running out the door and brandishing an axe. Like, I would be wroth with anger, and you're always just so mellow and agreeable.
Oh, not really. I mean, I did voice my concerns about it on one Facebook post, and I think Richard from Hexany had chimed in on it. But I mean, that was, I mean, what was it? What can I do? Like, shouting at the top of my lungs is not going to get it resolved, and it's not going to get the project done faster. I had to learn to really work through the issues, and that it was so bad actually that it locked up Cubase, and Steinberg couldn't figure it out. I actually figured it out, realized what it was, and Steinberg was like, "We don't know. Like, we're trying to." It was terrible. But yeah, I complained once, and that was enough. And then I realized this is not doing anything, and I moved on to try to find the solution. But I feel the pain. Mm-hmm. I feel the pain.
You know what? Let's get off this painful stuff of technical issues and let's think of happier stuff. Let's just talk about audio, because audio is fun. Audio should be cool. There was an idea that we wanted to talk about later. Well, we're sort of getting towards the second half of the show, but maybe we should talk more about just doing some more fun, interesting things with game sound. And I can't remember which one. Was it Chase? Maybe you mentioned it. Just this idea of matching sound effects with music. And some of the things that you can do in order to make that process work, and tools or tricks or concepts that you keep in mind while working on a musicscape as well as a soundscape.
Yeah, absolutely. So typically the music is pushed to priority. And so if I'm scoring a game, I'll make sure to lock down the sound palette and whatever that's going to be. But I need to pay attention to the key signature, and with me and the way I write music, all the crazy modulations that happen. So I isolate probably the root notes of those, and then when I'm doing sound design, I have the music subtly playing in the background that I made, and then I craft the sound around the music so that it fits somewhere in context of it, even before it's implemented. That's pretty much it. That's a really small tip thing that I do. I'm sure there's other probably easier ways to do it, but that works for me.
Mm-hmm. How often is your sound design tonal in nature, so that you do really want to match up the key of the music with the quasi key of your sound design?
I guess it depends on the sound in creation, right? If I'm doing a UI, then if I'm doing, I find that doing major thirds, intervals, perfect fifths, descending and ascending, as well as perfect fourths, are safe in terms of it being tonal. And then, I mean, like I said, if it's something like with just white noise of some sort, and it's like more simplistic, it can kind of just be in the, like, it can settle into the background. Just have to be careful within that upper mid-range area to soften it a bit. But like I was saying, the pleasant intervals are more tonal and helpful, that I've realized that help glue it together a little bit better, and not having it be so busy. That's the other thing I learned, is like with the sound design, is it just needs to be quick and concise and not over the top, because it's kind of work together. You just wanted to make it like the player is alerted and then moving on. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
Man, when you're actually playing playing music while doing sound design, like, is there like a particular process that you're doing, like, or do you just like run it in, say, a media player while you're working in Cubase on sound effect design or something like that?
I have a couple different options that I've kind of done. The media player is one that I've done, and then also bringing it into the DAW is another, just to actually balance the mix of it too, to see like how hot it would be. And then that's like the first step of like the gate, whereas in bringing it into the DAW to match like maybe volume if it's over or if it's under. Because I learned when I have it outside and externally playing in the media player, that kind of gives me not such a good reference in terms of the desktop volume versus what the DAW volume is. And I think you guys can understand what I'm talking about there with sound cards and such. So bringing it into the DAW sometimes definitely is a better step in the process to understanding like what the final is possibly going to be like until you get to the middleware implementation or the exact engine implementation.
Yeah. Are you ever doing any of that stuff inside of the middleware where I'm going to play my music event and also tune things in my middleware with the sound effect there?
Yeah, since I've been working with middleware more now in the career based off of obviously the projects that I'm on, it's been a lot easier for me to work with that with either within the engine or the middleware after the fact. And because of how we design the sound and whatnot, like their layers are easier to kind of just craft through and batch out faster and then throw it back in. But the middleware process, even when I have to do like direct implementation through, I think it was like OpenAL and script it in with the volume, it was a lot quicker. But like I said, doing it in the DAW got me at least 80% of the way. So I only had to adjust like volume, triggers, and events and other things like that very in a minute way.
That's cool. Mike and I have had a lot of fun working on projects together. We've worked on a few projects together, and in those situations, it's generally I'm sort of overseeing all of the music and the sound effects, and then I'll have to do the sound effects production. And Mike is working on the music. We just recently finished Down the Rabbit Hole, which is Cortopia's latest VR title that we did together. And it's always a huge amount of fun. We don't do anything, like we have no sort of funny hacks and tricks and for achieving good consistency between the sound effects and the music, other than a lot of conversation and a lot of sort of stylistic conversation about here's the scene, what's the mood that we're trying to create, what are the key points that we want to emphasize or de-emphasize. Generally, Mike will then, he'll have his sort of test cue that he'll do first, which I'll tend to use as sort of a creative compass to sort of say, okay, Mike went that direction. It's very, very soft. It's very pretty. That then will inform sort of the aesthetic choices or the aesthetic options that I have when I'm approaching the sound design. And then there are also a few situations where it's gone the other way, where I've landed in the scene first and I've made a sequence. And then Mike has said, can I have a video of the sequence with the sound effect that you're going to hear here? And then Mike will work something to the sound effects and goes the other way around. I think if you're fortunate to work in a team with, if you're a sound effects person and you work closely with a composer or the other way around, there's a whole lot of fun that you can have in just, number one, I think it's really important to be able to have that same musical vocabulary with each other, to be able to speak sort of on the same level and the same language as far as understanding the options that the composer has. In this case, Mike's wheelhouse is orchestral instrumentation. So for me, having some degree of understanding of what options he has there aesthetically, and then for Mike also to understand what options that I have working for sound effects in a VR game, definitely makes those conversations a lot of fun and quite efficient to be able to sort of set that aesthetic kind of guideline for this part of the game so that we can both be working towards the same goal.
To give one fairly rudimentary example of this kind of collaboration, this is about as simple as it gets, but it was very effective in practice. There's one level in Down the Rabbit Hole where there are clocks everywhere. And Alex was working on some fairly intricate sound design of many clocks in tandem. And he said, why don't we make the music, the tempo of the music, kind of like a multiple of 60 BPM. So that way there'll be some coordination between the ticking of the clocks and the music. And I said, oh, so that's really cool. So you can have the music, align exactly on the beat of the clocks. And Alex was like, no, we can't do any of that. But as long as there's some correspondence between the two, will perceive the synchronicity. Even if it's the musical pulse is falling 250 milliseconds after the tick of the clock, the consistency will create a kind of coherence between the score and the sound design of the world. So again, that's not super brainy on our parts, but that's an example of a collaboration. I wouldn't have thought to do that without Alex's input. So that in that case, the sound design really did help the score, and communication between sound design and score really helped the game.
Yeah, that was that actually worked too. It creates these really sort of polyrhythms. That's what they are. Sophisticated polyrhythms, completely intended, completely calculated. And guess what? It's different every time you play.
That's how sophisticated they are. Some people like the same polyrhythm or the same meter in their music all the time, but no, we're moving on to new dimensions of stochastic music previously unexplored.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's it's basically the general rule of thumb for working with composers if you're a sound designer, or working with sound designers if you're a composer, is just love music and love sound, and try to learn as much as you can across the board, different genres, so you have some understanding what musical options there are, what sound design options there are, so that when you come to have those conversations, you can kind of talk the same language and come to very, very quickly come to an agreement on, okay, this is the guideline for this part of the game.
To give a cautionary micro tale of what happens when you don't have that kind of coordination, occasionally I'll be scoring a game and there'll be some sound effect designed by somebody with whom I've not been in touch, and it'll be a tonal sound effect. It might be like a little trumpet fanfare or something like that. And the key relationship with the music will just be as random as possible. So you've got this awkward dissonance of music on top of music and feeling like the two have no relationship to each other, like, two musicians on a street corner battling it out. So it's one thing, it's nice when you're either both sound designer and composer like Chase, or there's kind of a tight collaborative spirit between the two, as with Alex and myself, as you can avoid problems like that and both can feel like they're cut from the same cloth.
Yeah, that's all sounds great. I have just kind of want to do a little anecdote from a couple years back when I was at GDC. There was this pretty interesting Final Fantasy audio talk that happened. And the talk itself was all right, but what happened afterwards was actually rather more fun. It was an audio director as well as an audio designer from Square Enix that were just hanging out after the talk in the breakout room, and people were interested in continuing to grill them and ask them more and more questions. And one of the people there was asking about how much, how important is it for sound effects to have a tonal component to it? And what really struck me here was that one of the Square Enix people, I can't remember if it was the director or the designer, he actually said, yes, that tonal component is important for all sound effects. I was like, wow, that's actually a really big sweeping thing. But it's really hard to manage if all your sound effects are going to have tonal components, to have that fit with a really wide variety of different music that could be doing all sorts of different things. Maybe they're in totally different keys, or they're doing all sorts of different jumping around in different harmonies. Can you actually guarantee that that stuff will really fit in, especially if you're doing something on such a significantly large scale? 50 music tracks, hundreds and hundreds of sound effects. And it's really just crazy. But one thing that I have done, even if I'm not necessarily actually going to do anything on the sound effects side that is going to be tonal, is that I will actually put key markers in my DAW that are going to be exported when they go out into WAV files. And once they're in my middleware, those markers are actually still retained. And whether you use them or not, well, whatever. But if you do decide to use them, you can at any time get a little notification whenever you hit one of these markers, thanks to a little callback function on Harmony that I just sort of throw in everything now. Oh, I am in F major, I'm in B flat major, I'm in A flat major. If what I'm really doing is like, something like G Lydian, then I'll actually say D major instead, and I just translate that all. But if I'm ever making a tonal sound effect now, I'll always have some sort of enveloping or layering that is going to respond to that parameter for whatever key I could possibly be in. So, that's just sort of a thing that I found that, okay, I had to practice a little bit at it and just add that to my workflow, but really it just increases the amount of time I spend on either the music side or the sound effects side by like maybe, 5-10% really. But having that information there and being able to respond to that potential information, I think is huge.
Yeah, that's it's interesting. I'm just trying to recall that I don't think I've ever been in the situation with the projects that I've done where music has stretched on predictably long enough, and I could say that, okay, at this point in the music, there's going to be this sound effect, and I know it. Like, it's definitely predictable that at this point, there's going to be this sound effect. So I have the opportunity to match the keys or intentionally avoid the keys if I really wanted to create that separation. Like UI sounds, I suppose, like a UI interface. I guess like a pause menu or something like that might be an example where you have UI sounds mixed with predictable keys. Interesting. UI, generally VR games don't tend to have pause menus just because they're very hard to do in a way that doesn't remind you that you are playing a video game. Of course, there are pause menus in VR games, but we don't see them as often, especially not in the arcade stuff that I did mostly before. Obviously, a pause menu in an arcade game. Amazing. Imagine that.
That'd be great.
You could go have lunch.
Let's see. Well, speaking of pause, I think it's almost time for us to take a break before we go on to our next episode 2 weeks from now. But before we take that break, we need to go around the horn and actually talk about what games are we playing right now. Wait a minute, what? Chase is already... What is this? Is that a lament? Tell us about this, Chase.
It is. All right, so... I don't know where to begin. So I guess I'll just keep it short. It's Castlevania Lament of Innocence, and I'm loving it. I'm loving every bit of it. I've learned that Igarashi and Yamane have done it again and captured my heart. This is the one on PS2. I'll be looking forward to Curse of Darkness after that. It's a 3D Castlevania. And the first Castlevania I actually played was Lords of Shadow on PS3, and that's how I actually got into it. And I went backwards and played the one on Game Boy Advance and Game Boy and stuff like that. So this is like probably the fifth one I'm playing. And yeah, I've got a lot of ideas from the music and music implementation even. So it's good research. And when I'm stressed out, I just hop in the other room and play for like 4 hours. I'm actually close to beating the game, so I'm very excited.
Oh, man. Fun times. Wait a minute, let me just look at this. How old is that game, you would say?
Let's see here. 2003.
17 years old. That's like
good oldie but goodie.
That's practically ancient history now.
It's good though. Manual and everything.
Nice.
Yes.
Beautiful.
That game can almost vote.
It's going to be a good vote. I can't wait to do a video about it. It's going to be amazing.
Oh man, Mike, are you playing anything at the moment?
I've picked my next game because I read a review of something that intrigued me so much that I decided I've got to try this out, and that is Death Stranding.
Good luck.
A fairly recent release, late 2019. It has this weird prophetic correspondence to our current situation because the world has been taken over by, I think, either monsters or a virus or some combination, and everyone's living in these little isolated feudal communities, and you are a delivery guy bringing much needed supplies to appreciative, isolated people. And it was done last year, so it's not like they knew that our actual world would bear some resemblance to this scenario. But it was intriguing and interesting, and the premise struck me as so unusual that I said, this has got to be my next game. So in future episodes of this show, I will have a report on what that experience is like.
That's great. I'm looking forward to that. I haven't actually played it myself. I've watched other people play it a bit last year. And of course, I've heard a lot of really good things about it. Alex, are you playing anything at the moment?
I'm still tracking along with Half-Life, Alex. I haven't played it for the past week, which just explains why I'm sleeping a whole lot better and feeling a lot better in the morning. Because it's the new hotness in VR right now for obvious reasons, and it's the first time that we've had such a massive budget put into a VR game. It is exceptionally good, but it's pretty scary.
Oh man.
There are some parts in it that's like, okay, yep, this is pretty effective immersive gameplay right here. I'm feeling quite scared right now. So I don't recommend playing it at night by yourself in a room. If possible, in the morning is probably better.
Oh.
I'm taking a break for the last week and a half or so, but that's what I'm playing.
That's cool. I do have a quick question. Like, how long are your play sessions of Half-Life Alyx? Like, are you doing 10 minutes, 30 minutes, or are you like really living inside that headset?
Well, testimony to the quality of the design and the implementation of the game, about 60 to 90 minutes.
Wow.
Is one session. And that's for a VR game, that's very impressive because it takes a lot of very, very careful design and implementation to make sure that you don't. It's an accumulative thing. Like you little savings here and there to ensure that your FPS is always up there. Means that you can play it for longer without feeling so tired. And I use the Rift S, which is very comfortable. So long sessions, no problem. Can't say that about many VR games, but this one you can say that about.
That's really cool. I haven't been playing too many games other than work right now, although for reference, I have been playing fighting games, which is great. So just giving me reason to break out my wireless Saturn 6-button pads. I've been using this with lots of different games, both emulated and PC games. These are really darn good. These are the best. And it's not an arcade stick, but this is not 20 pounds taking up much needed desk real estate. So I love these things. So that if you like old school games, playing them on your computer, get this thing. And they're really pretty cheap too. So yeah.
I'm actually playing wireless controllers with this one too. So, and I got to update my sticks are like ridiculously done, and I don't feel like doing anything to change them. So I'll probably be in the market to buy that sweet thing and the newest PlayStation or PlayStation 2 wireless controller.
Nice. Well, cool. We're going to be playing some games when we're not working. And when we're not working, we're going to be planning on the next episode of the Game Audio Hour, which will be 2 weeks from now. Thank you for watching. Thank you to the people in the chat who threw out some really cool questions and comments. And, if you're watching us right now and you haven't seen us before, well, you could hit that subscribe button there on YouTube. You could like this video on YouTube. You could also check us out on Twitter and on Facebook. And until next time, bye.
Bye.